everyone, and welcome. I'm Laura Mandel, Executive Director of the Jewish Arts Collaborative. Today, I'm excited to be with this incredible panel as we dive into some of the many facets of the Shape of Play installation by artist Sara Brunelle that has been installed in Waterfront Park in downtown Boston since September. If you have not yet had the opportunity to experience the piece, I hope that this conversation inspires you to get out to Waterfront Park, which is at the edge of the North End, by October 31st. So today we're talking about play because Sara Brunelle was inspired by play and playgrounds in making this piece. This came out of our call to artists, which was solicited to find pieces about freedom, originally commissioned around the Jewish holiday of Passover, which is the Jewish holiday that focuses on freedom. And as Sari so clearly and beautifully states, there's this inextricable link between freedom and play. So today I'm excited to explore that a little bit. Now, it's amazing to me how much new importance this piece has taken on in light of COVID and world events of the past few months. And for me, especially as a mom, the last few months have been definitely not particularly free feeling. And going to playgrounds with my own children has been a really important thing, both because of the freedom we all feel when we can go out to the playground and because of the lack of freedom we felt when COVID made it just feel unsafe to be on the playground. And that's just my own experience. So just as this is very personal to me, I think we can all find meaning in this piece. And this is why I'm so excited to be here with this panel today, to dig into some of the connections between freedom, play, and how the physical space and built environment really impact this. So before I introduce each of our panelists, I just want to say thank you to all of you on behalf of J Arts and Now and There, the Now and There team, our curation partners, and an extra special thank you to Renee Loth for bringing us all together. I want to use our time to let you hear what these experts have to say. So here's a snapshot of who we are with. First up in alphabetical order, we have Sam Aquillano, who is the founder and executive director of Design Museum Everywhere, a nomadic online museum that brings the transformative power of design to everyone, everywhere. Sam is also a host of Design is Everywhere, a weekly podcast on the impact of design in our lives. Next up, we have Sara Brunelle, who's a designer, researcher, and play advocate whose work focuses on challenging traditional ideas of play. She's currently overseeing the design of Unity Park in Dorchester, a pocket park designed with teens from the Lena Park Youth Council. Then we have Tiffany Kogell, who is a founder of the Cross-Cultural Collective, a platform to elevate and celebrate African diasporic arts and its creators. She's a mother of 4 and passionate about reflecting racial inclusion and economic equity through design, art, housing, and public spaces. And unfortunately, while she was not able to be with us today due to a last-minute emergency, we had hoped that Elliot Ortega, who is the Chief of Arts and Culture for the City of Boston, would have been with us. And of course, our moderator extraordinaire for today, Renee Loth, is a journalist and columnist for the Boston Globe and the former editor of Architecture Boston Magazine. This fall, she is celebrating 50 years of living in the city of Boston. So before Renee takes us in this, we just have a short video to get you in the mood, and then Renee will take us away.
Great. Great, thank you. So welcome everybody, good afternoon. I'm Renee Loth, I'll be your moderator today. As we've just heard, this community dialogue is centered around the question of civic space, how it's designed and for whom. What I love about the Shape of Play is that it sort of addresses boundaries not only of, or breaks down boundaries not only of community or culture or race in our city, but also of age, which I think is a divide that we often overlook when we're talking about inclusion in our society. The pandemic, as we also heard, which we cannot escape, has offered or forced, depending on your point of view, an opportunity to rethink our public spaces. The repurposing of city streets, for outdoor dining is just one example of that. So I'm interested in how play spaces sort of fit into that reassessment. If you don't mind, I'm just going to change my view so that I'm not looking at myself. Thank you. So I just want to jump in here. I think maybe I'll start with Sam. In a city as balkanized as Boston can sometimes be, what is it about the design of a public space that can send signals either of welcome or of exclusion to our communities?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's hard for me because design is so ubiquitous that it's every element of the design sends some signal to people, different groups, what have you. I mean, I think a lot about those decisions and what it means to put a chain link fence around a playground like that sends a pretty strong signal, or to put a playground in a specific neighborhood and not put playgrounds in other neighborhoods. So all these things matter. I think the other element of this is the design of the playscape itself sends signals to the people, usually young, but people of all ages, of how to play on it or how not to play on it. And too often, I think our playgrounds are designed so that's very obvious how you play, and therefore you actually aren't free to play, right? The instruction is built into the design, and that can be very limiting and actually make it not fun. And that's what I love about this piece and what Sara has done. I know it's billed as a public art piece, but she's created a playground, right? It's an open, exploratory, you get to decide what you do with it. It's fun, it's vibrant, and so it's existing kind of in these multiple perspectives, which is great.
Yeah. I mean, what about the design process itself? I know Tiffany had some thoughts about this. How can that be more welcoming or inclusive to all of our communities? I mean, Boston, I love it. We heard that I've just spent celebrating 50 years of living here, but it's a city with some invisible boundaries, and good design and a good design process ought to be able to mitigate some of that. So how do you see that?
Well, in our previous discussion, it came up how, yes, Boston is very diverse, but there are certainly invisible boundaries that keep it from feeling like it's diverse or welcoming. And so when we think about open spaces, they should be welcoming, they should be open to anyone who decides they want to participate, but that is not always the case. And when we think about access to outdoors and open spaces, we know, it seems to be that in more underserved neighborhoods, there is less open spaces. So, the idea of people venturing out of their neighborhoods to go into other neighborhoods where there are more open spaces, how does that feel? What does the access feel like? So that's one point that I hope that we can talk about a little bit more. And then the other point is kind of piggybacking on what Sam said. When we think about open spaces or play spaces, normally we're designing for children. And it was also brought up previously that those children have to be accompanied by someone. And normally it's the primary caregiver, which is a mom, sometimes dad, and maybe a daycare provider, older sibling. And so they have to be in that space as well. But we can't really see or experience play or open spaces through their perspectives, relying on our own expertise as we would like to think it is. And so the question then is, why aren't we asking people in the neighborhoods where these spaces are being designed what it is they want to see,
right?
What it is they want to experience? And so that would call for us to reprioritize the design process to amplify the voices of residents and abutters and people who may not also live immediately in the area, but people who would be close enough to access those open spaces because of a lack of such in their immediate neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So community process is something very important. We know how that works when big developments are being built, but we don't really necessarily take that, we don't use that principle as important when designing spaces for outdoor spaces and for play.
You know, I'm reminded of a column I wrote in the Globe several years ago about a community garden, like a victory garden in Mattapan on Wilson Street, where there was a vacant lot, and it had actually been the site of a murder, or quadruple murder, I think. So the community wanted to do something with that vacant lot, and good, well-meaning outsiders said, well, let's put a park here, you know, because Mattapan needs green space and we need a park. And the community, you know, luckily was able to come into the process and say, no, you know, we don't want a passive space there, because maybe kids will be, you know, or teenagers, or will be attracted, will be drinking or drugs or problems at night. We want something that's activated, that has eyes on the street, you know, that has people involved in it. And so this community garden, which people joined and were working all the time in, became a better alternative. But, you know, if the community hadn't been you know, consulted, we might have had a space there that really wouldn't have worked as well-meaning as it might have been, you know. So I think that's you know, it's a really good point. You know, we also heard in the introduction that this Shape of Play was initially commissioned by the Jewish Arts Collaborative to debut in the spring, and of course the pandemic delayed that. Because it wanted to surface themes of freedom, because the Passover story is very much involved in that. And so freedom in play. And that brings me to Sara and some of the work that you've done. I've long been interested in the tensions in our society between freedom and safety, and particularly in playgrounds. I mean, you know, wearing the mask or not during the pandemic is a perfect example of that. You know, am I free not to wear the mask if I want, or do I have to be concerned about community safety? It's just one of many tensions like this in our society. So particularly when we're talking about children, we often have that tension between freedom to play and run and climb and their safety. So how is your work, I know you've researched this and worked on this, address these questions of risk and of freedom?
Right, so there's a lot of angles, I think right now, just addressing the pandemic. As a CPSI, which is a Certified Playground Safety Inspector, I've noticed the conversation in that forum to really shift towards hygiene, sanitization in playgrounds, which I think is necessary. It's very of the moment, but what gives me pause is that we've had this long progression, I think, since the 80s and 90s, really, of making our playgrounds, the priority in our playgrounds to be risk mitigation. So really designing playgrounds so that kids can't get hurt, kids can't, and in this case, you know, that this is a COVID-free environment and all of this. And I think what has happened is that we've really prioritized a certain type of play and sort of what's the result of that is that kids aren't able to explore risky play and challenge, which is so important developmentally. So in our work, we were looking, and this is with Mariana Bersoni in injury prevention and public health. And basically what we were looking at is how a playground that lacks risk and challenge versus a playground that has a multitude of natural elements, risky play elements, challenge, can change the way children engage with an environment. So we basically did this long-term study to see these two groups of kids in these two different playgrounds. And in fact, yes, adding risk and challenge and more diversity of play helps to decrease bullying and helps to engage children who are otherwise not as, you know, perhaps want to engage with more physical play. So I think the idea is that we can give a toolkit to designers and sort of more freedom to design less stringent, strict playgrounds to add more spaces within spaces, materiality. I'm with a firm here, G2 Collaborative, and I think our approach to playgrounds is really looking at how it can serve a different, like many groups of children at different developmental ages by being open-ended and flexible.
Sam, you're nodding.
Yeah, I was just gonna, and I can get, I can really go down the rabbit hole on this because I feel very strongly, I know Sarah does as well, like we got to introduce some risk into this because you take it all the way, and I don't want to sound alarmist, but I'd love to flip the conversation. It's more risky not to have it because later in life, the world is risky. Our experiences are risky, and you get into some really tough, challenges. If a kid doesn't spend their whole childhood falling down, skinning their knee, learning how to get back up, and what happens when they get a tough professor in college and they get a bad grade and they start having thoughts of suicide. They've never developed the mechanisms to take risks, try things, fail, but recover.
Resilience.
That resilience is critical, and that resilience is taught on the playground in play environments. And that's where I'm always like, can we flip this around? Because we need our kids to know how to be resilient, how to take risks, how to try things, because that is what the world is about.
And what a safer place to do that than the playground.
Right.
You're right. With your peers, you're often with your parents, and we can design these spaces to have them explore risk and be hazard free.
Exactly.
So there's a real difference between risk and hazard, and I think oftentimes that's conflated. Mm-hmm. So a hazard is something you can't see, you can't measure. A risk is something you can take on willingly.
Yeah, I'm even interested in just perceived risk. That would be enough, right? Like, I'm still safe, to your point, but I perceive that this is something maybe I'm having to balance on this thing that has a slight kind of graded, I'm going up a hill. If I fall, it's not a big deal. I'm going to roll down a rubber, grade, but I'm challenging myself, I'm trying something. And, we talked a little bit before of just having a stretch where you can just run full on high speed. Like how many places do kids have left to just go? And sometimes I think playground design, it's better when there's nothing there, right? Is because they can create their games, their ideas. It doesn't always have to be a thing.
Yeah.
Tiffany, you're a parent. Do you buy into this? I'm just wondering, how do we get parents to agree to some sort of controlled risk? Because I think that, over the last several decades, parents have increasingly tried to control the risk around their kids.
Yeah, so obviously your number one job as a parent is to make sure that your little ones don't kill themselves.
and alive.
We just want to keep you alive. That's our number one goal. And so when you bring your children to outdoor spaces, it's not some place that you've had the prior opportunity to childproof according to their age. And so for a parent, that can be a little concerning. And you also can't control the other children and adults and other passersby who are in that space. So those are always concerns that parents have when they bring their children to parks. They're just things that are out of your control. But I will say, as far as risk mitigation, my children are between the ages now of 13 and 31. And I can say that through raising each one of those children, they were very, very different experiences. There's one of them now, break from class. And when my older one was younger, I would bring him to the park, and there was kind of like a area where moms would sit, and we would just let the kids go. And since I was a very, very young mother, I think for me, that responsibility of, don't let him get dead. So, a little bit of the helicopter mom. And then as I got older and more mature, I was able to realize that, baby's gonna, scar their knee anyway. And that's what, Neosporin and Band-Aids are for. And they will be fine. And And then I will also say, lastly, is that when sharing stories with my children, and when when they're sharing stories among each other, it's so evident how where I was in my capacity as a mother, which reflects their experience as a child when they were playing, and also the current atmosphere and the neighborhoods that we happen to be living in, that also molded those children's experiences. But I will say that my experience as a child, I was a daredevil. And although my mom was very strict and my father was very open and free range and wanted me to learn about myself and my environment and kind of work on setting boundaries for myself, I was very attracted to heights and jumping off of things and standing on my head, you know, under a swing and like all of these different things. And so when I had children, I did not allow them to do those things because I understood the risk. But I also believe that, you know, 50 years ago, 40 something years ago, the thought of play didn't have so many boundaries and restrictions. And, you know, back in those days, way back in the day, it wasn't uncommon for a parent to say, make sure you're inside before the street lights come on. And so there was trust, and there was the knowledge that children needed to be independent and play and be able to roam and learn how to make those decisions. And because of the way the world is set up today, and even in the last generation or so, parents aren't really able to give their children that level of anonymity just because there is so much risk.
Right. And what about for adults? I mean, Sam, for example, do adults also benefit from this kind of freedom? If we can.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for one, taking this into our companies and being creative. I mean, creativity is all about play and being able to try something and have the freedom to think, you know, outside the box, if you will. But also staying in the city, I guess, just the whole notion of having a playful city can mean so much for happiness for residents, right? Our cities don't have to be a you know, a weight on us with too often they feel, you know, that has a lot of factors from, you know, cars, you know, our cities being designed for cars versus people, but just also our environment of, you know, why does play have to be in a specific spot? Why can't the whole street be a playful, why isn't the, you know, is it the MIT T stop that has the chimes? Like, why doesn't every T station commuter rail stop have some play element that just makes you think and makes you try things? And I know we're talking about a public art piece. Public art has the same, that's the backdrop for a vibrant city that just, it's colors, it's not just concrete and brick. It actually turns the city into a work of art, a play environment that benefits all of us. And I would love to see, I mean, Boston has a long way to go.
We have a very bad reputation in terms of public art. We're very cautious.
Oh my goodness. I sometimes, because we do a lot of work in other cities, and, you know, I go to Portland, San Francisco, I've seen public art everywhere in every corner I turn. And it's, again, I see this word vibrant just keeps coming to mind, and Boston just has, that's why I was so happy to see this piece and see it out there, because it does, in Boston, it's very jarring. You're like, oh my gosh, how did this person actually do this? Because we need more of it. We need to multiply this by 10. And people smile, people laugh. That's what we need, that now more than ever, right?
That's right. I mean, I think the secret to the shape of play is that it's temporary. I mean, my experience in covering public art in the city of Boston is that if somehow the powers that be, that poor Cara is not here to defend the city, but, you know, can be reassured that this is only temporary, you know, but this is not going to be here forever, that somehow they're willing to take more risks, or you know.
That's how I've gotten everything done that I've gotten done at the museum. We installed the playground in Chinatown, the play cubes, and I'll be honest, especially since Kara's not here, we can just talk just amongst us. When I first brought, I mean, not to take too much time, but that playground was donated to the museum, and they said, if you find us a place, you can do it. So I brought it to the city of Boston, I brought it to the state of Massachusetts. Everyone said, no, we don't want it. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So to Tiffany's point, I just went around and said, hey, here's a community, let's ask them if they want it or not. And then I went back and said, well, it's gonna be temporary. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. There's less risk for us and we can try it. And we installed it temporarily in Chinatown Park. And then 3 or 4 months went by and we did a survey in the Chinatown community with the Chinatown Neighborhood Association. And 94% of people said they want it to be permanent. And so I just took that number and just slid it across the table. But yeah, I mean, that's the whole notion of tactical urbanism. And like people, they have a hard time visualizing the impact. It is very complex. And so you don't know if putting a park or a playground is going to change everything. And so do it temporarily. Oh, the world didn't end? Great. Let's make it permanent.
Yeah. And are there lessons for making our public spaces, our civic spaces more inclusive or welcoming in that? I mean, I'm just now thinking off the top of my head, are there ways to either through temporary art or temporary interventions open up the city more so that people can feel at home? Sara?
Yeah, I just want to bounce off what Sam was just saying. It's just as a designer, when you get into the idea or the headspace of play, it unlike other design, it's about whimsy, it's about magic, it's about, you know, bringing up something sensorial, material that I think is like, it unbinds you as a designer. It's why I love to design playgrounds. And I think, you know, as you're saying, the public art that engages play can be, you know, like what I love about this piece is how it engages sound. I mean, like, when do you get to stand in sound in that way? And I think, like, I'm always advocating that play can be more than gross motor. It can be more than physical play. It can have elements of multimedia, multisensory expression. So.
Yeah, and it can be designed for, I was just gonna go right back to what Tiffany was saying about, you have to talk to the community that these spaces are going into. I mean, I'm not the expert in this. I just know how to listen. And some of these new parks that are coming on, I know the designers are even thinking about the sculptures and public art. Like, why are we putting a statue of Christopher Columbus in a park that's predominantly Black and brown people? Why is that park not filled with statues and memorials for Black and brown role models that these kids want to look up to? I mean, that's the level that you need to get to of appropriateness and relevance. And then just one other point on age. What is the age makeup of the community? Renee, you mentioned like, oh, people are worried about teenagers. You can design an area for teens. It's possible. And if you have the ability and the space, matter can only exist, you can't exist in the same space, but areas where kids in the community can actually kind of graduate through a space, I think is incredibly impactful, so that you kind of see and you have other, you know, ages around you to see what's possible. But those all matter, every decision.
Go ahead.
I would like to kind of tie that into, Renee, your question about how do we feel about what's needed to bring diversity into parks and how is that missing? And so actually, Sara and Sam, what you're talking about art and play existing in a space and how that affects people, how that causes them to feel, and how that accommodates the encouragement of play. And so there's different kinds of play, there's different experiences, and that has a lot to do with what age you are. And so Renee, you had recalled the story where the Mattapan neighborhood may have expressed some concerns about not wanting a space that would encourage a place for unsavory things to take place, or things, or encourage things that weren't safe for the neighborhood. But I want to push back on that, and I would like to get people to start thinking from a different perspective. Open spaces are a right for everyone. They 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 So if you happen to belong to a demographic who are more apt to get into trouble because of their lived experiences or the neighborhoods that they're brought in, the events and atmosphere that they're exposed to, then then that's the community's responsibility to accommodate them. That's not a reason to cause them to be outliers and decide for them and for the community that they don't have a right to that open space. And so when I say young people, I'm also talking about homeless people. And I'm talking about people that may suffer from mental illness and who may present and act out in ways that cause others of us to be uncomfortable. And so, and now that we're within this pandemic, we're looking at open spaces to accommodate a lot more of a solution than what it used to. And that was just, it's time to get these kids out. They need to kind of run out all their energy, or we need a change of scenery, or let's just go do something nice as a family. And now we see it as an extension of a classroom for children who are doing remote learning. We also see it as a part of people's intentional self-care routines, because they don't happen to have a space that they live in or spaces immediately outside of their homes or yards to be able to experience nature, get fresh air, and be in an element that is healing and rejuvenative. And so when we think of diversity, we're not just thinking about the people who would, enjoy that place, but diversity and purpose for that open space. And so now we have the Black Lives Matter movement. We are living in one of the most troubling social and political eras ever. Some people call it as the second coming of the civil rights era, which I truly believe that that is. And so when we think about protests and we think about people on different sides of political parties, how do they interact with one another? We have got to start thinking of design in terms of how do we unite one another. And maybe the playground and open spaces would become a sacred place for people to be able to interact and engage with one another, regardless of who I am or what I believe, or what I want to see happen. And so when we think about diversity, we should think of all levels of diversity when it comes to open spaces, understanding that we all have a right to those spaces, regardless of who we are.
I wonder if any of you think that the changes that Tiffany is talking about, the new ways that we're having to think about our open spaces as classrooms and, commerce, places for commerce, or of course, places for mental health, that have been surfaced through this pandemic, will they be enduring? Will there be, lasting changes in ways we think about our open and public spaces when this is, inshallah, over?
Yeah, I hope we're not designing these spaces with COVID in mind, because COVID will end and these spaces will exist for decades. And so we really have to design them. But to Tiffany's point, I think hopefully, if we're intelligent about this and we're realizing that, to her point, this is a right, and it's a need. And I'll just make the point that we just need more. We have minimal open spaces right now, and we task them with a lot, right? And it just, the best design in the world can only do so much with a parklet or a small park. We need more open space in our urban environments. It's as simple as that. And they need to be spread so that there's access for everyone. You shouldn't have to. In our book, we wrote about play deserts, and just it's so sad to think about in this, pre-pandemic. And to Tiffany's point, if you're sitting there with your young family and you live in an apartment building, there's no outside, where are you going, right? We need more. Simple as that.
There's a movement afoot among many cities, I think Boston is part of it, to ensure that some green space or some play space is within a 10-minute walk from every citizen in the city. And I think Boston may even be, at a pretty high level, 80–90% or something like that, in achieving that goal. But of course, the quality of the green spaces they are not equal. And so you have, the Esplanade and the Common and all, and, beautifully designed Olmsted Parks spaces. And then you have, dense communities where there's, I live in Brighton, and even right down the street here, there's a playground that's really
10 minutes is too long.
Oh,
We brought I forget, it was an underinvested community elementary school. So at the Design Museum, we brought these elementary school kids to the Esplanade playground, and they, of course, were like, "This is like it's like seeing a spaceship for the first time." And talking to them, I'm like, "Oh, you've never been here before? You live so close. Never been to the Esplanade playground. Never been to the waterfront."
yeah.
Right. So we do have access. 10 minutes is not access. 10 minutes is I'm out the door and I'm there, because Tiffany, and I don't know if Sarah has kids. 10 minutes is a long time.
A lot can happen in 10 minutes.
A lot can happen in 10 minutes. And then also, if we do want to get back to the space where we are letting our kids out, 10 minutes is too long. It's too far. And so, I think it's a good step, but I think we could do better. And it could even be more around neighborhoods, or even micro neighborhoods around what that, I love what Tiffany mentioned about, like, that could be the living room of the neighborhood. And if we think, or living rooms, if we think about it that way, it might get us closer to kind of the experience we're going for.
We had a recent, one of our design projects is with Lena Park. It's a CDC, and it's a small pocket park, just in Dorchester, and it's right across the street from Franklin Park. But unfortunately for that neighborhood, you can't get across Blue Hill Ave. You can see it, but you can't access it. And what was wonderful about this project is that on many levels, the youth group at Lena Park was engaged in how to design this space. So it was just a group of teens, and there were some absolute stars in that group. And what they were looking for was basically what we're talking about. They wanted a space that was accessible, not just to them, but from tots to elderly. And they were just asking about how every member of their community could come to this space. So, Tiffany and also Sam, you've been talking about it, but it is like, when you engage your community in design, but also designing with teens, not just for teens. So interesting.
Expanding the team to co-create.
How much they understood about what their neighborhood needed. I think because, speaking about playgrounds, we never design spaces for teens. Like, we end at 12. And then it's just an empty liminal space until you become an adult and you can go somewhere else. And so it was very special to design with them because they were so generous in how they thought about space.
Cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's an important new development too in community design processes generally, to bring them outside of the traditional, like church basement 7 p.m. meeting that, working families may not be able to attend, or, the same 5 people seem to go to every community zoning meeting that we have in the city and say the same damn things, right?
Yep.
So just busting out of that, framework for how we invite people to help us design things and think about a design process, I think can be.
Even that experience can be designed, right? Because you can have various ways that you engage the community. This was we wrote about this in our magazine, and it was based in Greece, but they wanted to get the larger community in Athens, like designing this new park. They designed a whole bunch of public games, right? And they used, one of them was like using these tiles, and each color of the tile represented a different use of what the park could be, and you kind of made your tile composition. Another was like literally sketching. So you can design that public engagement experience. And I honestly, and Tiffany and I've talked about this a lot, like that's the next level of design.
Mhm.
That's what needs to be figured out of like, what's the best practice around that? Because then I don't want to diminish, certainly anywhere Sarah's done are people designing the actual spaces, but man, if we can get that upfront stuff really solid, the final designs are going to be stuff that we never would have come up with as quote unquote experts ourselves.
So one of my favorite lines is, there's enough room for all of us. We're all important in our own way, and we all bring something different to the table. And I think if history hasn't taught us anything, is that when there's only one voice, then that means we're in trouble. Everybody's in trouble. And so both Sara and what you, Sam, were describing, telling those stories of those different instances of park design, how much better is an installation when there are so many minds and innovative ideas that come together? And it's not just the outcome. I think about the design process as an experience that becomes a story and memory, not just for the people that were actually involved, but the community. That is a story that they will always be able to tell. And reflect on how people came together, how people worked together for a common goal, coming from different perspectives, having different priorities and goals, right? And so if we can do that for play, maybe we can teach those up there in the government, maybe that we should listen to one another. But I feel like design has the power, done well. And when we reach all of the benchmarks, holding on to the important tenets of what design should encompass, obviously the community process and changing perspectives to be more empathetic and inclusive, we will find the answers. Because those of us who have gone to school or that we work in these industries of design, we have a particular expertise. But those of us who live in neighborhoods where we have historical history, memories, stories, adjacency to the atmosphere, and how a thing became a thing in the neighborhood. Exactly. How do you design something for people in a neighborhood who are also different in and of themselves and may have, different cultures and bicultures and all of these different perspectives and lived experiences? It is really, it's very, I think, off-putting, and I say that to give a very, very strong impression. It's like, how dare you think that you have the capacity or even the right to take the voice of this neighborhood and ignore it and not be inviting to listen to it when you're deciding what's going to be in their neighborhood, something that you can see if you want to, you can come visit. But this is something that the people in that neighborhood and the children in that neighborhood are going to engage in and interact with every single day, even if they're just getting off the school bus and walking home. So we need to reframe the design process and prioritize things that are human-centered as opposed to end goals like budgets and what we think as designers
our own
in a correct.
One of the things that the artist Sara Carroll said about this installation is that because it's for children, we tend to, as a society, sort of diminish their interests and their rights and their voices. And that, one of the things she wanted to raise up was a question of respecting children. Just because they're children doesn't mean that they don't have needs and voices and concerns. And often, she said, the often sort of gendered role of the mothers and parents, which also, as mothers, as women, also get diminished. That was another one of her concerns, but primarily around children. Now, we can't see them, but apparently there's like 30 people who are watching us. And I just thought I would see if any of them had questions for the group at this point. We've got about 8 minutes left, to see if there are any questions. You're supposed to write them into the chat. Again, I can't see you, so I don't know if you're doing it, but I just thought I would take a half a second to see if there were any. And I think Laura is going to.
I'm back. Yes, I'm popping in because I do have some questions from behind the scenes here. So one thing that I think people are really appreciating is that you've all spoken to very concrete things you have done to change the landscape of our community, to bring playgrounds. I mean, Sam, the fact that you were paving the poundment to find a community who wanted this playground is kind of amazing and alarming all at the same time.
Yeah, it was
experience. Well, and I feel like this is a common theme in things you've all said, right? About like, who are we trying to work with and who are we fighting, you know, along the way, or who are we trying to not fight with to get there? And I think the question that seems to be bubbling up is, how can we each play a role in supporting this? What can we do as community members to say, not just, hey, we need another playground, but hey, there's open space in our community that could use some help, or we really want X, how do we get there? I think a lot of people would love to know, how do we do that?
Yeah, I can tell you from the book that we wrote, Design and Play, we heard a lot. I think even I went into the whole Design and Play project thinking that when the city wants to make a new playground, they wave their wand and they say a playground is going to go here. That happens. But normally when it's successful, it's the community saying, we need this, and coming together as a group and making some noise and saying, we need this and here's why. And the city works for us.
Yeah.
That's a crazy notion, I think, but that's the truth. And so I think if there's all, of course, I'm sure many different people on this webinar and different expertise, but anyone who lives in a community who, if you're with a group of people that thinks there's a need for an open space and there's a utility that you require, organize and petition and do surveys and make some trouble and make something happen.
Okay, so I'm following that line of thought. You said make some trouble. So the next question that someone wants to know is, you know, it's interesting that there's this great debate about public art in Boston. And I think many of us are aware that the word public art for most of time really has meant bronze sculptures. And we live in a new world where for the past few years, there are a handful of us who are really committed to doing more temporary work, and for a variety of reasons. And there's a question about basically, what do we need to do to get more temporary art? And what does that look like? What are the barriers? What would we all love to see that's a continuation of this?
I don't want to take over the whole conversation here. I think so much about this because over, it's 11 years now that I've been doing public art, public design in Boston. It has gotten easier. So I will say that, like when I first started the museum, doing stuff in the public realm was, oh my gosh, it was impossible. So it's gotten better. I just, what are the barriers for more of it happening? I think there's a few. The planning department in Boston is very strong, and the real estate developers in our city are extremely powerful. So how do we put pressure on them that we want this? They want to sell condos, they want to rent their places. Well, we want public art. I mean, you can see I have a lot of criticism about the Seaport, but there's art going in. WS Development is putting in some cool art. I could be activated more, could be more local. I would love it when I go to these other cities, the public art's also, the word messy comes to mind, and that's not the right word because the art is meticulous and beautiful, but it's smattered around. It's not every project, and I'm sure Sari's work was very strategic. You did a lot of work around it, but like, I would love just an abundance, I love like the cherry tree. Cherries are just falling, and maybe this one grows and this one doesn't, but yeah, I'm not an expert enough on the permitting and whatnot, but I think we just got to start trying more. We got to get developers to make part of their building, one whole side of the building can just be a mural. I don't know. There's a lot of power that is blocking this that I would love to untangle.
So I see it as people having power. And you spoke to this as soon as you got resident buy-in, and neighbor buy-in for the Chinatown installation, what is it that any city official or department can say to you other than, well, I guess, you know,
I guess we better do this.
I guess we're going to do this. And so I think also as designers, it's educating people who want to be educated, but also sharing information of empowerment with people. And there has to be some kind of created forum where, you know, look at what we're doing now. We're sharing stories. We're sharing experiences. And there are folks that are tuning in for various reasons. But we have a way now that's become normalized of communicating with one another. And so if we really value art because we understand how transformative it is and what it really brings to a neighborhood and a city, and how that can really transform how people feel. Like you had mentioned, Sam, about sometimes a city can feel very burdensome, but when there's art and there's open spaces and there's play spaces and there are enough of them, it can feel, you know, like almost like you're a tourist at every neighborhood that you go visit. And it really does instill a feeling of positivity and well-being. So I would empower ourselves. You know, so art can happen everywhere, you know, sometimes in the middle of the night, and people just enjoy it into the rain. And
I'll give you another example from Portland, Oregon. They, in some of their neighborhoods, the intersection, you know, two streets crossing, the community just plans, they paint it. It's just beautiful. The city didn't say they could do it. They didn't get a permit for it. They did it. It got done. What would happen in Boston that happened? I don't know. But again, that's why I say it was, you know, the late John, like, we just got to make trouble, like just make stuff happen and try stuff. Good trouble. Thank you. And I just want to shout out to Now and There, because I think what they're trying to do is demystify some and train the artists so that they can get through some of these barriers a little bit easier. You know, so they're doing great things. And then it's like up to all of us to kind of speak up and be like, we want more of this, like make this happen. What's your arts agenda? What's your, how are you gonna amplify local artists so that their art is shown in their own communities? Like, these are questions we got to ask. Otherwise, it's not gonna happen.
Right.
So it's up to us. And I am psyched that we have Now and There doing this stuff.
Yeah.
Anyone else have thoughts on that? I want to just, you know, reinforce the idea of temporary, because I just think it makes everybody, you know, calmer and more creative and more willing to take risks. And, you know, some of the sort of political public art that we've had in the city have been not just temporary, but sort of ephemeral. You know, there were projections on buildings of, you know, sort of difficult social questions that were expressed through art, and they were allowed because they, you know, they weren't going to be sort of permanent, and so the stakeholders were just a lot more comfortable with it. So that's just important, I think.
Oh yeah, I think if we could amplify the temporary nature, that could get us to that point of, again, showing the powers that be that the world's not going to end if there's a mural on this wall. In fact, it's going to be much better. My experience, again, over 11 years of doing the public design in Boston, is every time we've done something, whether I thought there was a good piece in the end, or there were the naysayers who were like, this is never going to happen. You say you make it temporary. A few months go by, those same exact people ask us if we can make it permanent. Yeah. Wow, this was so great. How could we make this permanent? Sometimes the answer is, man, I could have used that information months ago because unfortunately we didn't design it to do that. But in some of these cases we did because we had confidence. But yeah, I think if public art can take the tactical urbanism approach and learn from it, and maybe they're, like Tiffany saying, some, you know, guerrilla, like in the middle of the night stuff, and you wake up and you're like, well, how cool is that? And on the flip side, I know what like Now and There's doing is like getting permits, like making it real. It is just going to have to be that level of trying things and failing, succeeding. But I do think there's a critical mass involved that's like, there's just a lot. We can't settle for we have this great piece in Christopher Columbus Park that is unfortunately, I think, going to be ending soon.
October 31st.
Yeah, like how do we, does it move? Does it, like, how do we just get more? That's the big question. That's what and maybe to your point, Renee, maybe it's the temporary to permanent.
Yeah.
Temporary is a great way to get your foot in the door.
Yeah.
So that those making decisions feel a little more open to say yes, because it's not a hard, definite, forever choice that they have to make. But I think the change really comes just in our voices and taking the initiative to make sure that the people in the city understand that this is something that we want. So how are you going to facilitate making it easier for us to get this, and include them in the conversation as a responsible party in this, and not have it be so much on us as like, how in the world are we going to get them to agree to give us a permit? When the question should be, what is it that you need to do to make it easy so that you can provide me with a permit so that we can beautify our neighborhood?
Yeah, and so that you, by the way, you're going to benefit.
Exactly. The responsibility needs to shift. And if enough voices speak in that way, you can kind of, painlessly
that is a great point.
People into a different mind frame, mindset, and perspective.
Yes, 100% what you said. Who always shows up to the ribbon cuttings, to the viewing, are the electeds. And it's like, where were you 6 months ago?
Yes.
And so I think we got to bring that mentality so that when they do show up, it's like, well, here's our next project.
Yes.
We want you to be part of it.
Exactly.
Like, you're part of the co-creation.
And as you said before, those in government and those that are making the laws and making decisions, we elected them there, or they're in that position for our benefit.
Absolutely.
And art is to all of our benefit.
100%.
Yeah.
That's great. Are we running out of time?
I was going to say, we are just about out of time, and I feel like you guys have brought so much to this conversation. You actually got a compliment and a question wrapped up in one, which is, when are you going to meet again? Because this has been wonderful. It would be great to bring in more people from the city. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there that I think we should do a second part of this with others involved, because this has just been so wonderful. Before I wrap it up, Renee, if there's anything else that you want to say, please. And I think if we go 2 minutes over, no one will mind. So if there are any lingering thoughts.
No, I think we've touched on a lot of important things about, the importance of our civic spaces, how we design them for whom, and the, the importance of temporary art. I think that's really underscored, and properly so. The questions of, freedom and safety, which were so surfaced in this particular work, but are marbleized throughout our entire society. Those questions of that tension between the two, how can we break that tension? I think, this has been a terrific session, utterly what I expected with this group. And so I just thank you for giving us the opportunity, Laura.
Yes, Renee, thank you so much for bringing us together. This has really been a fabulous conversation, everyone. I feel like we are all so in this. So like I said, we're gonna have to do a follow-up. There's just so much to think about, and not just to think, but to actually do. So I am most appreciative of all that you all do in our community already. And I think that together there's a lot more that can be done. So thank you for letting the Shape of Play be the motivation to bring us together today. But I think it's just really exciting that this is just one small piece of the bigger Boston story. I'm so impressed by all that you are doing. And I just wanted to let everyone out there listening know that this is the second to last conversation of the Shape of Play run this Sunday. For any of you with kids in your lives, probably ideal, maybe 4 to 8. We're going to be doing a music and art making workshop with artist Tova Speeder, who has been a part of this project from the very beginning, working with Sara Brunelle. We were supposed to have a series of gatherings in person that were not destined to be. So we're going to bring some of that back, and musician Oren Kaunfer is going to lead us in some music making as it relates to the piece. So for any of you looking for a distraction for your little ones on Sunday afternoon, the 25th at 3:30, please join us. I will be there with mine and they'll be making some noise. And of course, we will send a link in the follow-up email. And as Renee so beautifully said, don't forget, this piece is up through October 31st. It's a perfect Halloween activity, a perfect anything activity. So please make sure if you have not been there yet, or if you just want to refresh, go down to the Waterfront Park or Christopher Columbus Park and view this piece. I hope it will really have an impact on us all, and we'll keep this conversation going. So thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you from now and there as well. And I look forward to what comes next.
Thank you. This is great.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.